Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right, but nothing is truly working? You go to therapists, you read the books, you download the meditation apps, fill your home with crystals and affirmations, write in journals. You follow all the rules. And yet, there's a nagging feeling deep inside, isn't there? A feeling that something is still fundamentally missing. It's like you're standing at the edge of a deep wound, just touching the surface, but never truly healing it. You're trying to fix yourself. But what if I told you the entire modern approach to healing is a trap? A sophisticated illusion designed to keep you searching, but never finding. This feeling of being lost, the sleepless nights, the anxiety that comes from nowhere, that vague, persistent sadness. It's not a chemical imbalance. It is your soul screaming to be heard. It's a sign that you have been disconnected from your true self, and the very methods you're using to heal are just another form of escape. But there is a secret, a profound truth, hidden in the teachings of the legendary Carl Jung that holds the key to unlocking a powerful and rapid transformation. This video will not give you another temporary fix. It will guide you on the true journey back home, to the core of your being. Before we dive into this life-changing secret, help me see how far these powerful teachings can travel. Please, take a moment and comment below with what city or country you're watching from. It's incredible to see. Our community spans the globe. And speaking of community, a surprising number of people who watch and transform their lives with this content forget to subscribe. If you feel a connection to this message, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It's a small click, but it ensures you won't miss the insights that could change everything for you. And of course, giving this video a like helps spread this crucial message to others who are searching, just like you. Now, prepare yourself. What you are about to discover is the secret to emotional healing that almost no one will ever tell you. Jung said it clearly. What you resist persists, but what you embrace transforms. And what does it mean to embrace? It means to stop running, to stop filling the calendar with 1,000 commitments so as not to feel. To stop looking for external answers that distract us from the internal ones means sitting with the pain and asking it with tenderness. What have you come to tell me? It means opening space for sadness, for fear, for anger, without wanting to understand everything right away, without rushing to find meaning in it. Because many times what pain needs is not for us to analyze it, but for us to listen to it. Healing begins when we dare to listen, but listening hurts. Because listening requires looking at our choices. It requires questioning relationships that support us, but extinguish us. It requires dismantling stories that we invented to survive. Stories in which we made ourselves strong at the cost of disconnecting from who we are. Listening may mean recognizing that the life we lead is not the one we desire, that the roles we play distance us from the truth, that the masks we wear are suffocating us. And that, of course, is scary. But it is also the beginning of a silent revolution, because when you dare to truly listen, something begins to change. You realize that maybe you are not healing to go back to being who you were. You are healing to finally allow yourself to be who you always were. From there, you understand something fundamental, that healing is not an event. It is a coexistence with your truth, a continuous process, sometimes slow, sometimes confusing, a coming and going, a cycle, a dance between what emerges and what dissolves. There will be days when you feel strong, luminous, at peace, and others when you seem to have regressed, relapsed, lost your way. And all of that is okay, because healing is not about stopping feeling pain. It is about learning not to abandon yourself when the pain returns. It is knowing how to stay, to remain, not to flee, not to betray yourself anymore. Real healing does not make you invulnerable. It makes you whole. And being whole is not always being well. It is accepting that there are parts of you that still bleed, that still tremble, that still doubt. It is to stop demanding emotional perfection and start offering yourself presence. And when you offer yourself presence, when you hold yourself, something begins to heal. Not by magic, but by truth. because the part of you that got sick from abandonment finally begins to feel seen. And that gesture, as subtle as it may seem, is profoundly healing, because you are telling your soul, I am here, I am not going to leave. Maybe what you need today is not another technique, not another method, not another promise. Maybe what you need is silence. Listen, right? Because only you know what you feel, only you know your story, only you can embrace your life with the compassion that no one else can give you. And that is why healing is within you, because it is in you where the wound lives. It is in you where the truth resides. It is in you where, although dormant, the strength to find yourself again beats. One of the first lies we were told about emotional healing is that it is outside, that there is someone wiser, more enlightened, more prepared, who has the perfect answer, that there is a revolutionary technique, an infallible protocol, a magical practice capable of dissolving all the accumulated pain. And we believe it because we are exhausted, because we want relief, because the idea that someone or something can rescue us from the abyss sounds profoundly comforting. And so we begin to run from therapy to therapy, from book to book, from course to course, chasing the hope that in some corner of the world, the definitive answer is hidden, the one that, when found, will finally give us peace. And there is nothing wrong with searching. There is no mistake in wanting help. But sooner or later, a silent discomfort appears, a void that is not filled, a diffuse feeling that we are still incomplete. Because no matter how many tools we have, if we do not find ourselves in the process, something essential is lost. And then we ask ourselves, could it be that I still haven't found the right method? But the real question should be, am I finding myself, or am I just trying to fix myself to fit better into a world that never saw me as whole? Healing is not about perfecting yourself. It is not about becoming an ideal version. It is not about reaching an impeccable emotional state to show that we are well. True healing is not at the service of performance or image or the approval of others. It is actually a process of unlearning, of dismantling, of removing the layers that were imposed on us. Healing begins when we stop trying to be what they expect of us, and we begin, with compassion, to look at what we really are. And that hurts, because healing is not covering what is wounded with light. It is not softening the dark to make it more acceptable. Healing is stripping down, letting the armor fall, letting go of the characters. And that does not sell well, because the self-knowledge market often promises peace, fullness, abundance. It tells you that if you follow the 5 correct steps, you will stop suffering. It invites you to a fast, bright, perfectly edited path for networks, but what it does not tell you is that there is no shortcut for the soul, and that creates a cruel cycle. The person seeks help, finds momentary relief, then the pain returns, feels guilty for not having healed completely, believes that they are not evolving enough. They go back to looking for another technique, another retreat, another workshop, and so they repeat the pattern. It is a spirituality of performance where one has to show that one is healing, that one is improving, that one is vibrating high, even if inside one is still bleeding. This tireless search for a perfect cure hides a deep fear, the fear of looking at pain directly, because looking at pain requires silence, it requires presence, it requires the courage to feel everything that was repressed for years. There is no technique that can do that for you. There is no guide that can walk that part of the journey in your place. Sitting in front of your shadow and listening to it is a non-transferable task. That is the blind spot of most modern healing processes. They want to illuminate the shadow without letting the shadow speak. And the shadow always speaks. It speaks in relapses. It speaks in the anger you do not understand, in the sadness without cause, in the shame that suddenly appears, in the fatigue that does not go away, in the relationships that repeat themselves. It speaks in your body, in your skin, in your breath. And every time you run to a technique without listening to what that voice has been saying, you reinforce the abandonment. You tell your soul once again that it is not enough as it is, that it needs to be fixed, that it cannot feel what it feels. True healing, on the other hand, begins at the exact moment you stop healing to please. When you understand that the goal is not to eliminate suffering, but to live with it in a more honest, more human way, more gentle. Because in the end, pain is not transformed by struggle. It is transformed by embrace. Not when you deny it, not when you correct it, when you recognize it. When you stop asking yourself, how do I get rid of this? And you start asking yourself, what is this wound trying to show me? That is the profound turn, and no one can do it for you. You can have support, listening, containment. But the key moment occurs in the silence of the early morning, when you are with yourself, without filters, without masks, without distractions. And there something begins to move, not by force, by surrender, not by control, by surrender. True emotional healing is not so much about doing, but about being. Being present, being honest, being vulnerable, being whole, even if you are in pieces. And that being is not learned in a course, it is discovered little by little, in the spaces between expectations, in the moments when you allow yourself to fail, to feel, to fall, because it is there, right there, where you stop trying to fit in, and you finally begin to find yourself. When you stop running from pain, something in you begins to awaken. Not immediately, not with fireworks, not with absolute certainties. Sometimes it's just a longer pause between one thought and another, a sigh you didn't know you needed, a vague feeling of relief, as if something inside you is finally breathing. And although it still hurts, although the confusion has not gone, although you still do not fully understand what is happening, you feel that something minimal but real has changed. That change is not the result of a technique, it is not the product of a mantra or an inspiring reading. It is the fruit of a silent gesture, the gesture of having stayed with yourself, of not having betrayed yourself this time, of having resisted the temptation to disguise yourself again to keep functioning, because that is what you did for so long. You did not function, you performed, you gave what they expected of you. You were everything you thought you had to be, except you. And now, little by little, you realize that you do not need to keep running to be safe, that you do not need to fit in to be valuable, that you do not have to hide your sensitivity, your sadness, your questions for them to love you. Because if love only comes when you leave parts of yourself out, it is not love. It is a pact of silence. So you begin to allow yourself something radical, to feel without anesthesia. Not all the time, not every day. Sometimes only for minutes. But you no longer repress as before. You no longer ignore so quickly. You no longer disconnect from yourself with the same ease. And that, although it may seem small, is monumental. Because the part of you that was numb, the one that cried in secret, the one that did not feel seen, the one that did not know how to speak, begins to understand that it can come out, that it has space, that it will not be pushed back to the bottom of the emotional closet again, and that heals it. Sometimes healing is nothing more than that, letting out what you kept for so long. The anger, the sadness, the fear, the disappointment, the tenderness you never showed, the tears you did not shed, the words you swallowed, the times you said yes when your whole body screamed no. Healing is allowing yourself to say, I don't want to pretend it doesn't hurt anymore. It's to stop justifying those who hurt you. It is to let go of the duty to continue understanding everything that happened and simply begin to feel it, to live the mourning, to honor the wound without having to explain it. Because you do not need to have a perfect story to deserve compassion. You do not need to prove that you have already overcome everything to be worthy of being loved. You do not need to be completely well to belong. It is enough that you are you with all that implies. And then what begins to change is not only internal, the world outside also begins to readjust. Relationships that you tolerated before now weigh you down. Conversations that you accepted before out of inertia now make you uncomfortable. Places that sustained you before now suffocate you. Because you are feeling again, you are recovering your center, and your soul no longer accepts crumbs, neither in relationships nor in truths. It may hurt, it may confuse you, it may scare you to feel that your world as it was is crumbling, But that collapse is necessary because you are not losing your world. You are letting go of what was built without you, what was raised from your silence, what was sustained while you were fading. And now you are coming back. Returning to yourself is not only an act of courage, it is an act of love. One of those that make no noise but change everything. Because when you return to yourself, you recover something that no trauma, no story, no wound could destroy. Your ability to be a home for yourself. And that is priceless. Healing is also remembering. Not remembering like someone who mentally reviews a fact, but remembering like someone who collects pieces of themselves that had been forgotten along the way. Because for years, perhaps from a very early age, your soul was leaving parts of you behind. Sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of love, because you had to survive, you had to please, you had to adapt. And so you left pieces of yourself in places where they could not flourish, in relationships that extinguished you, in environments that did not see you, in decisions that were not yours. And you did it with the best intention, because no one chooses to get lost on purpose. One gets lost like someone who sacrifices themselves in silence, believing that it is the only way to go on. But over time, something in you begins to weigh. Something feels hollow, as if you were living a life that does not belong to you at all, as if you were a spectator of your own story. Then the moment comes, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly, when you can no longer continue in the same way, when something inside says enough is enough. It is not a scream, it is a whisper, but it changes everything, because once you hear it, you can no longer pretend you did not hear it. You can no longer go back. And even if you do not know where to start, you know that you cannot continue to betray yourself. That is where the reunion with the forgotten begins, with the child you were, with the teenager who cried alone, with the times you swallowed the pain so as not to be a nuisance, with the dreams you postponed, with the emotions you buried alive. To be able to keep walking, not as a nostalgic journey, but as an act of dignity, to come back for yourself, to collect what is yours, to shake hands again with what you once had to reject from yourself to be loved. And that does not always feel nice. Sometimes it hurts more than any external abandonment, because you realize that you were the one who left yourself alone, that you were the one who denied yourself, that you were the one who, for the love of others, forgot yourself. But it is also the beginning of an immense truth. If you left yourself, you can also come back. If you fell silent, you can speak. If you left, you can return. This reunion does not happen all at once. It is not an event, it is a process of layers. Sometimes you find yourself in a casual conversation, sometimes in a smell that stirs something in you, sometimes in a piece of music, in a phrase, in a dream, in a tear that falls without warning, and there it is. A part of you that was asleep comes back to you and you receive it. Each of these returns, however small they may seem, are portals. They are sacred. They are like small lights turning on in the map of your soul. They guide you. They show you that you are not broken. You are just fragmented, and that now you are finally beginning to gather your pieces. Not to go back to being who you were before, but to become who you always were before the forgetting. And in that process, something beautiful begins to flourish. Trust in yourself. A trust not based on achievements, nor on appearance, nor on external recognition, but a deep, serene, silent trust. A trust that says, I can be with myself even when everything is burning. That says, I do not need to understand everything now. I just need not to abandon myself anymore. Because in the end, that is what hurt us the most. Having left ourselves, not having had someone who stayed when we needed it most, and not having known how to stay with ourselves. But now, you are learning, you are coming back, you are listening, and when that happens, the healing has already begun. It does not matter how much is missing. It does not matter if it still hurts. The important thing is that this time, you are with yourself. There is a moment on the path of healing that is not usually mentioned. A delicate, invisible, intimate instant. It is when you can no longer continue in the same way, but you also do not know how to continue differently. When you have moved away from the old pain, but the relief has not yet arrived. When you have left behind the patterns that harmed you, but you still do not know how to build something new, that moment feels like emptiness, like being suspended in the air, without ground, without direction, without certainties. And everything inside you wants to flee, wants to return to the known, even if it hurts, wants to return to the automatic, even if it turns you off. It wants to look for anything to cover the silence. Because silence, when we are not used to it, is scary. It confronts us. It shows us what we avoid seeing. But if you manage to stay, if you decide for the first time not to run, something begins to change. To remain is a profoundly revolutionary act. Not because it is heroic, but because it is rare. Because almost no one taught us to stay with what hurts. To hold the emptiness without rushing to fill it. To look at fear without trying to annihilate it. To allow ourselves to be without doing anything. And it is that we are so conditioned to solve, to understand, to advance, that we forget that the soul does not work in a hurry, that there are pains that do not want to be explained, only embraced, that there are emotions that do not need a solution, but a space, and that space can only be offered by your presence. When you stay with yourself, even in chaos, you are reversing years of internal abandonment. You are telling your wound, I do not have all the answers, but I am here. And that, although it may seem small, is everything. Because the deepest wound that many of us carry is not the pain itself, but having had to carry it alone, having felt that there was no safe place to be, to cry, to fall apart, to not know. So, when today you choose to stay, even if you tremble, even if it hurts, even if you do not understand, you are creating that place within you for you. A place where you do not have to pretend, where you do not need to prove anything, where you are not a corrected version of yourself, but you as you are. And it is in that place where the true alchemy begins, because there is no transformation without presence. There is no integration without permanence. You cannot heal a wound that you reject. You cannot embrace a part of you that you do not accept to look at. But if you stay, if you breathe with it, if you stop pushing it out, it begins to soften, to open up, to tell its story, and there, in that silent story, you discover something that no one had told you, that your pain has meaning, not because it is fair, not because you deserved it, but because it holds a truth, a call, a message that was trapped in the middle of the noise. Perhaps what sadness was saying was that you were living a life you did not choose. Perhaps the anger was the voice of a part of you that was never defended. Perhaps the anxiety was the warning cry of a soul that could no longer bear to continue on automatic. Perhaps the fear was a sacred warning. Do not abandon yourself again. And by listening to it, something in you begins to calm down. Not everything, not at once, but enough to continue, to take the next step without running, to trust, even if for an instant, that this path, however confusing it may seem, is taking you back. Back to what, you will ask? To you, to what you were before the noise, before the duty, before the masks. Back to the pulse of your soul, to your most intimate truth, to that place inside you that never broke, it just hid. And if you can stay there, even for a minute, you are already healing. Much is said about the fear of failure, about that paralysis that prevents us from moving for fear of making mistakes, of being judged, of not being up to the task. But there is another fear, more silent, more hidden, deeper, that almost no one talks about. The fear of shining. Yes, the fear of shining, of occupying one's own space, of showing who you really are, of living with the intensity with which your soul longs to live. Because when you have spent so much time turning yourself off to be accepted, when you got used to shrinking so as not to be a nuisance, when your story taught you that being you had consequences, then the light is also scary. To shine after a wound can feel like exposing yourself, like becoming vulnerable, like opening a door that you had closed for protection, because your brightness, your authenticity, your living presence are not born from perfection. They are born from the scar, from what survived, from what learned to speak after. So much silence. And that is scary, because deep down you know that if you show yourself, some things will change, some people will move away, some dynamics will stop working, Some bonds will break because you will no longer be betraying yourself to sustain them. And then comes the sacred question: am I willing to lose what does not belong to me to find what does? That is one of the most powerful thresholds of the healing process. To stop being afraid of your own expansion. Because it is not that. You are afraid of growing. You are afraid of growing and being left alone. You are afraid of being you and not being loved. You are afraid that by raising your voice, by lifting your gaze, by setting limits, you will lose everything you thought you needed. But what they did not tell you is that everything you lose when you become you was never yours, really. You only held on to it so as not to feel the emptiness. You only accepted it so as not to face loneliness. You only tolerated it to continue belonging, even if it cost you your soul. And a day comes, sometimes in the middle of a crisis, sometimes in silence, when you decide that it is no longer worth it, that you prefer to be you, even if it means walking alone for a while, that you prefer to be a nuisance rather than become invisible again, that you prefer the tremor of authenticity to the numbness of repetition. And on that day, something is released, not at once, not with euphoria, but with truth. You begin to feel that, although there is still fear, there is also desire. The desire to speak with your voice, to move with your own timing, to choose from your center, to look at your reflection, and finally recognize yourself without guilt. And that desire is sacred, because it is not born from the ego. It is born from the soul that is returning to its place. And then, little by little, you begin to shine, not as a show, not as applause, but as an internal fire that no longer wants to be extinguished. A fire that tells you, do not hide who you are anymore. Do not pretend what you do not feel anymore. Do not shrink anymore to fit into small spaces. And it may still hurt. There may still be doubts, but there is something that is no longer negotiable: your truth. And that is the beginning of all freedom. Carl Jung said it with a clarity that cuts through. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And in that brave, silent, radical gesture, one of the deepest parts of the healing process begins: the encounter with the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not something that should be extirpated, corrected, overcome. The shadow is everything we could not be, everything we hid to be loved, everything we judged in ourselves because we were taught it was unacceptable, the anger you learned to disguise, the sadness you denied so as not to be a nuisance, the desire to scream when you were only allowed to smile, the fatigue you hid to appear strong, the wounds you did not show for fear of rejection. All of that is shadow, and most of us live denying it, projecting it, disguising it as virtue, covering it with superficial spirituality, with quick consumption self-help, with pretty phrases that do not touch the depths. But the shadow does not give up. It does not fall silent. It just waits. It waits for the moment when you finally dare to look at it without judgment, to sit with it as one sits with a forgotten part of oneself, not to correct it, but to know it, to understand its origin, to embrace its pain. Because yes, the shadow hurts, but not for what it is. It hurts for all that it carried alone. When you dare to look at your shadow, you discover that many of the things that bother you most about yourself are not flaws, but wounds. That impatience can be a mask for abandonment. That coldness may have been born from the fear of trusting. That the need for control may have arisen in the midst of chaos. That judgment may be a way of defending oneself from shame. And then you stop judging yourself so much, not because you deny your responsibility, but because you begin to understand your story, to connect the invisible threads between what you lived and how you learned to defend yourself, to recognize that every part of you that is hard for you to accept today was at some point a strategy to survive. That does not justify everything, but it explains, and by explaining it softens, and by softening it allows, and by allowing it heals. Healing is not eliminating the shadow. It is integrating it. It is making space for it. It is telling it, you do not have to hide anymore. You can be part of me. I give you a place. And when that happens, something changes. Not outside, not immediately, But inside, you stop living on the defensive. You stop being so afraid of making a mistake. You stop needing to be perfect because you no longer need the world to approve of an edited version of you. It is enough for you to be who you are with all that implies. And there, in that deep, silent, almost invisible acceptance, the true light begins to be born. Not a light that dazzles, not a light that denies, but a light that contains, that embraces, that illuminates without erasing the dark. A light that is yours. There is a part of the healing process that very few understand, and yet it is the one that softens the wound the most. Tenderness. Not that superficial tenderness that disguises itself in cliches and empty smiles, but a real, deep, embodied tenderness. The one that is born when you look at yourself with the same eyes with which you would look at a wounded child, with which you would touch someone you love and see them break, with which you would approach a scared animal trembling in a corner. That tenderness is medicine, and almost no one taught us to offer it to ourselves. We grew up learning to demand from ourselves, to push ourselves, to correct ourselves, to hide what hurt, to keep functioning. We were taught to be strong, but not to be gentle, to resist, but not to take care of ourselves. And so, when we begin to heal, we often do it from the same place, that of effort, of control, of the expectation of doing it well, of doing it quickly, of showing that it no longer hurts. But healing like that is also a form of violence, because the wound does not need you to push it. It needs you to embrace it, to speak to it softly, to tell it, I am in no hurry. I am with you. Even if you cry today, even if you cannot today, even if today you just want to sleep, to hide, to remain in silence, I am not going to demand anything from you. I will just stay. And that way of being with yourself, without judgment, without an agenda, without pressure, begins to do something that no method can do. It restores trust in yourself, because there is a part of you that has been on guard all your life, a part that always expected the next blow, the next criticism, the next rejection. And when you from within begin to be different with it, that part begins to relax, to trust, to show itself, to say, maybe this time it is safe to be me. Tenderness is what heals the most, not because it erases the pain, but because it holds it, because it listens to it, because it looks at it without fear, because it envelops it in a presence that does not judge, does not correct, does not get scared. And when you learn to treat yourself like that, everything changes. Relapses are experienced with less guilt. Crying no longer feels like defeat. Vulnerability ceases to be embarrassing. Fatigue is not interpreted as weakness, because you are no longer demanding that your healing be perfect. You are allowing it to be human, and that is healing. Maybe no one has told you this before, but today I want you to hear it with your soul. You do not need to do everything right to deserve love. You do not need to be better to be worthy of yourself. You do not need to prove anything. You just need to stay with yourself with tenderness, with presence, with that gentle patience that tells your wound, you can breathe, you are no longer alone. And there, right there, the true rebirth begins. Many times we imagine healing as a moment of revelation, an instant in which everything changes, as if an understanding, a phrase, an intense experience were enough for all of life to be ordered. But the truth is different, less spectacular, more profound. Healing is choosing differently over and over again, sometimes in very small things. It's not that one day you wake up completely at peace. It's that you start to choose not to stay in places where your soul is extinguished. It's that you start to say no when you used to say yes out of fear. It's that you learn to give yourself breaks when you only knew how to force yourself. It's that you stop justifying the unjustifiable, that you stop sacrificing yourself to belong, that you start taking care of yourself without asking for permission. And that, although it may seem minimal, is a revolution, because every choice made from your center, even if it is silent, reorders your internal world. Every time you choose with truth, you are building a new relationship with yourself. You are telling yourself, I am worth enough to respect myself. You are affirming your existence with love. You are stopping living out of obligation and starting to live out of coherence. And no, it is not easy. because those small choices, often, make you uncomfortable, generate conflicts, provoke changes. You can lose bonds that no longer resonate. You can disappoint expectations that you always carried as your own. You can feel alone in certain stretches, but what you gain is incalculable. You gain dignity, you gain self-respect, you gain peace in your chest, you gain authenticity, and above all, you gain a new type of trust. Not in the future, not in the external, but in yourself, in your ability to choose from the soul. Even if everything around you trembles, that is what no one tells you. That true transformations are not seen from afar. They do not make noise. They do not generate applause. But they are felt in the body, in the breath, in the way you talk to yourself, in the way you hold yourself on dark days. Every time you choose differently, even if it is just a little, you are returning to yourself, and that slow, intimate, deep return is the most powerful of all. Healing emotionally is not just an internal process. It is inevitably a movement that transforms the way we connect. Because when you start to return to yourself, you also begin to look at the bonds you have built in a different way, and many of them no longer fit. There are bonds that you sustained from need, from lack, from the wound. Relationships where your role was always to give, to be silent to avoid conflict, to adapt so as not to be rejected, to disguise yourself to deserve love. And you did it not because you were not worthy, but because you learned that being you was not enough. And so, when you begin to heal, those pacts are broken. Not immediately, not without pain, but something in you begins to say, this no longer takes care of me. This no longer represents me. This no longer allows me to breathe with truth. And that hurts. It hurts to realize that some people do not really know you, that they love you for a version you invented so as not to lose them. It hurts to see that certain bonds are only sustained if you continue to betray yourself, that there are relationships where growing becomes a threat, but it hurts more to continue denying yourself to maintain them. That is why, on the path of healing, a natural cleansing often occurs. Not because you think you are better, not because you judge the other, but because you choose to honor your truth, even if it implies goodbyes, even if it leaves you more alone for a while, even if it breaks dynamics that you have been repeating for years. And here there is a key wound that many of us carry: the fear of loneliness, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being left without a tribe, without a gaze, without a place. But deep healing teaches you that it is better to be alone than in bad company with yourself, that you prefer the silence of your coherence to the noise of a relationship that requires you to pretend. And paradoxically, when you make that internal movement, when you choose yourself, the universe reorganizes itself. New people appear, new ways of loving become possible, no longer from lack, but from authenticity, from respect, from truth. Relationships are not lost, they are transformed. Some end, others are reborn, but they all show you something. Who are you being with yourself? Because whoever connects from the wound repeats wounds, but whoever connects from healing begins to create bonds that nurture, that sustain, that heal. We also live in a noisy world, a world that celebrates the word, that rewards speed, that applauds those who have quick answers, solid arguments, sharp speeches. But the soul does not speak like that. The soul does not shout, it does not reason, it does not argue. The soul whispers, and often it can only be heard in silence. But silence is uncomfortable because in silence, everything you avoided feeling appears. Everything you denied shows itself. Everything you distracted yourself with activities, screens, conversations, sits with you. And that can be scary. It can seem like loneliness. It can seem like emptiness. But it is not. Silence is not absence. It is deep presence, fertile space. It is the cradle of the true encounter with yourself. Because only in silence can you begin to distinguish between the voice of fear and the voice of your truth, between the noise of duty and the gentle melody of true desire. It is in silence that you begin to perceive what your body has been saying for a long time, what your heart has been silent about for years, what your soul whispers in dreams, in unexplained tears, in that feeling of, this is not for me, that you did not know where it came from. And yes, sitting in silence can be one of the bravest acts on your journey, because there, without distractions, without excuses, without witnesses, you find yourself not with the version you show to the world, but with the part of you that has been waiting for you forever. The part that does not need an explanation, that does not seek approval, that just wants to be seen, felt, honored. Silence is the medicine that is not sold, the door that no one can open for you, the space where healing occurs, not because you do something, but because you finally stop doing to start being. And the more you get used to that silence, the more you learn to listen to yourself, not to look for immediate answers, but to avoid the question with respect, to stay in the mystery without wanting to control it, to allow the internal truth to reveal itself in its own time, like a flower that does not bloom, because someone rushes it, but because the sun and the water were patient. In times of noise, choosing silence is an act of radical love, and in that love, the soul begins to speak. Since we were children, many of us were told that being sensitive was a problem, that you had to toughen up, that you couldn't cry over small things, that you had to be strong, brave, rational, that feeling too much was a flaw, a burden, a dangerous vulnerability, and so we learned to disconnect from the most sacred thing we had, our ability to feel. Because sensitivity is not weakness, it is language, it is an antenna, it is a compass. It is the way your soul perceives what is not seen, what is not said, what cannot be explained, but is known with the body, with the emotion, with the subtle vibration that goes unnoticed by the eyes of the world. Sensitivity does not make you fragile, it makes you deep. But when you disconnect from it, to fit in, to survive, to not be a nuisance, something in you begins to turn off, to harden, to close. And that closure, although it may seem like protection, is also an exile, a distancing from yourself. And one day, without knowing why, you realize that you no longer get excited as before, that the tears have dried up, that your chest has become a silent territory, that you no longer know what you feel, that you respond with logic, but something is missing, something essential, something vital, that something is your sensitivity. And on the path of healing, one of the most important and delicate movements is to recover it, not to suffer more, not to become more vulnerable to the pain of the world, but to reconnect with what makes you human, with what allows you to enjoy a song to the point of tears, with what makes you tremble with a hug, with what moves you without reason, because yes, because it vibrates, because it touches. Sensitivity is the soul in its purest state, and to feel again also hurts, because everything you numbed for years comes back. Everything you pushed down comes up. Everything you did not allow yourself peeks out. But if you have the courage to stay, if you allow that sensitivity to occupy its place again, then life changes. It becomes more real, more honest, more intimate. And you too, because you no longer need to act or pretend or be invulnerable. You can be you with your tears, with your joy, with your tenderness, with your spontaneous laughter, with your skin that feels, with your heart that trembles, but beats. Sensitivity is not something that should be controlled. It is something that should be honored. And when you do it, when you inhabit it without shame, you become a living channel of authenticity. And that is also healing. There is a part of you that is still waiting to be seen, heard, protected, accompanied. It is that part that did not grow up completely, not because it could not, but because no one accompanied it in its pain. That part is your inner child, and although you have forgotten it, it did not leave. It stayed there in some corner of the soul, keeping the memories that no one wanted to see, the tears that found nowhere to fall, the screams that were not heard, the gazes that did not arrive in time. It stayed there trembling, but waiting for one day you, the adult you are today, would come back for it. And on the path of healing, that moment arrives, not as a goal, but as a revelation. Suddenly, something in you recognizes that the emptiness you feel is not from now, that this fear was not born recently, that this nameless sadness has a history, and that history began when you were still too small to understand, but not to feel. Because childhood does not end when one grows up. It ends when it is looked at, when it is honored, when it is listened to with the heart of today, and not with the harshness with which you were forced to survive. And yes, by opening that door, everything comes back. The feeling of helplessness returns. The desire to be loved unconditionally returns. The scenes that you did not know how to name, but that were recorded in the body, return. The echo of harsh phrases, of impossible demands, of cold silences returns, but something else also returns. Tenderness returns. The possibility of hugging yourself as they never did returns. The freedom to cry for what you repressed before returns. The opportunity to tell that child, you are no longer alone. Now I am here, and I am not going to leave you. That encounter changes everything, because as long as that part of you continues to wait in solitude, it will continue to sabotage your relationships, your choices, your limits, your dreams, not out of malice, not out of whim, but out of pain. But when you embrace it, when you include it, when you give it real space in your life, then something begins to heal for real. And no, it is not about becoming a perfect parent for yourself. It is about being there, staying, holding without rush, creating a place within you where that child can breathe, play, cry, laugh, feel. And there, when you do it, everything in your adult world changes, because you no longer need to look outside for the love that was missing. You no longer ask others to repair what you can begin to take care of. You no longer run from pain, you embrace it. You no longer react from the wound. You choose consciousness. Childhood is not overcome, it is reconciled, it is honored, it is integrated. And that gesture is one of the most profound acts of healing you can experience. Long before you could put into words what you felt, your body was already living it, already registering it, already holding it. Because the body is the first home of the soul, and also the first to be wounded when life hurts. Your back remembers the times you had to carry what was not yours. Your shoulders, the tension of always holding on. Your chest, the silences you swallowed. Your stomach, the fear that was left with no way out. Your skin, the times you needed a hug, and it did not arrive, but no one told you. They taught you to rationalize, to understand, to explain, but not to feel with the body, not to ask it, what are you trying to tell me? Not to listen to it when it screams with symptoms what the soul has been whispering for years. And so real healing also passes through there, through returning to the body, through giving it back its place of wisdom, through stopping treating it like an enemy or a machine, and starting to inhabit it as what it is, the temple where your history lives. It is not just about doing yoga, meditating, breathing. It is about presence, about loving attention, about embodied sensitivity. It is about listening to physical pain, not as punishment, but as a message. About seeing fatigue not as laziness, but as a sign of emotional exhaustion. About feeling insomnia, not just as a disorder, but as an internal alarm that asks for attention. And yes, at first it can be uncomfortable, because the body has memory. And by paying attention to it, that memory is activated. You may feel sadness for no apparent reason. You may cry during a massage. You may feel fear when you stay still, because by entering the body, you enter the truth. But if you stay, if you learn to inhabit it with love, then it becomes a refuge. It becomes a compass. It becomes a silent ally that guides you, that warns you, that accompanies you. The body does not need to be perfect to be worthy. It does not need to meet standards to deserve tenderness. It only needs to be heard. And when you do, when you give it a voice, it also heals. Because healing is not just mental. It is also somatic. It is also tactile. It is also energetic. It is movement. It is tremor. It is rest. It is feeling again from within, without fear. There is a part of your healing that is only activated when you allow yourself to return to the body with compassion. And there another type of encounter with yourself begins, a more real, deeper, more complete one. Sometimes we believe that healing is moving forward in a straight line, as if inner growth were measured in firm steps forward, without stumbles, without setbacks, without doubts. But the soul does not move like that. The soul is not a train that runs, it is a spiral that turns. And in that spiral, going back is not always a mistake. Sometimes it is depth. Sometimes it is a second look from another place. Sometimes it is the only way to understand what you could not hold before. Healing is like that, a coming and going, a remembering and forgetting, a falling and getting up differently. It is having days of light where everything seems to fit and others of shadow where everything is disordered, of inexplicable peace, and others where the old pain returns as if it had never left. But it is not that you are failing, it is that you are honoring the cycles. Because healing is not an event, it is coexistence. It is an alliance with your internal processes. It is the humility of accepting that there are things that are only revealed in their own time, that there are wounds that need more than one visit, that there are layers that open when you no longer punish yourself for feeling them. And that requires a deep maturity, that of not despairing when it seems that you are returning to the same place, because you are not in the same place. You are on the same subject, from another level, with another consciousness, with another body, with another heart. Just as nature does not bloom all year round, you cannot always be in a state of expansion either. There are winters of the soul, seasons of withdrawal, moments of fertile silence where nothing seems to happen, but inside everything is rearranging itself. And if you can stay, if you can breathe within each season, without rushing, without demanding from yourself, without comparing yourself, then you begin to discover the real rhythm of your soul, one that does not accelerate with pressure, that is not forced with methods, that does not respond to external calendars, one that simply reveals itself, and there, right there, you begin to trust, not in a result, but in the process, in your rhythm, in your turns, in your unique way of flourishing. Because healing is not about getting anywhere, it is about inhabiting each cycle with truth. And in that dance, life breathes you again. We were taught to resist, to fight, to stay strong at all costs, to fight even with our emotions, as if feeling sadness, fear, or emptiness were a sign of weakness. But there is a moment on the path of healing when something inside simply gives up, not because you have lost, but because it no longer makes sense to fight against yourself. That surrender, far from being resignation, is a portal, an intimate access to a dimension of you that is never revealed under pressure. It is the instant in which you stop demanding that you be another person. You stop pretending that you are fine. You stop forcing a relief that does not come. And you finally sit down. You let yourself fall. You let yourself feel. And in that fall, something different is born. A calm that does not come from having answers, but from stopping looking for them desperately. A rest that does not come from an external solution, but from the internal permission to be with yourself, even in confusion. A love that is not a conquest, but a welcome. A love that does not say, "I will fix you," but "I will stay." To surrender is not to fail. It is to return home. It is to tell the body, "You no longer need to remain tense." It is to tell the heart, "It's okay if it beats with fear." It is to tell the soul, "Forgive me for demanding so much, for running so much, for not staying before." And yes, when you surrender, you may cry, you may tremble, you may feel a dense silence that seems like emptiness. But if you stay, if you do not flee, you will see that that emptiness is not dead. It is gestating a new way of being with yourself, a softer, more honest way, freer of expectations, more willing to embrace you unconditionally. Because healing does not come when you manage to control everything you feel. It comes when you no longer need to do it, when you can be broken and still be worthy of love, when you can be tired and still deserve care, when you can know nothing and still feel that you belong. Surrender is not the end. It is the first step of the true encounter. For a long time, maybe you thought that setting boundaries was selfish, that saying no could hurt, that protecting your space was synonymous with rejecting the other. But over time, something begins to change, and you understand that boundaries are not punishment. They are self-care. They are the silent language with which you tell the world, I am learning to take care of myself. And this is also love, because when you are healing, you are vulnerable, you are sensitive, you are rearranging your pieces, and you need space, time, presence. You need relationships that do not demand what you cannot give, conversations that do not force you to lie to yourself, encounters where you can be you, even if that implies silence. And that is not weakness, it is emotional wisdom. It is understanding that healing also implies reviewing your bonds, recognizing which ones nourish you and which ones drain you, distinguishing between those who look at you with tenderness and those who only look for you when you need to be strong. It is looking with clarity where you get lost, where you deny yourself, where you turn yourself off, and with that awareness saying, enough. Enough of pleasing so as not to be rejected. Enough of carrying guilt that is not yours. Enough of allowing disrespect in the name of affection. Enough of giving when you are empty. Enough of being silent so as not to be a nuisance. Enough of being where you are no longer. Because everything you do not name, your body sustains, and every boundary you do not set outside becomes an excess inside. So you learn that to love is also to know how to withdraw, that to care is also to know how to close doors, that to accompany is not always to stay, sometimes it is to let go, that setting a clear boundary does not destroy true bonds, it purifies them. It makes them honest and you become more you, without needing to pretend strength, without needing to justify your existence, without needing to explain yourself so much. Because your boundary, when it comes from love, does not hurt. It defines. It does not exclude. It cares for. It does not separate. It teaches. And the first one who needs to learn it is you, so as not to continue hurting yourself in the name of affection, so as not to continue betraying your healing for fear of disappointing, to begin to create relationships where you can rest and not just resist. Boundaries, when they are real, are not walls. They are bridges between your truth and your freedom. There are days when everything wavers, when the internal is shaken, when it seems that nothing has a foundation. And right there, where fear appears with more force, you ask yourself how to trust. And the answer is not a promise. It is not an external certainty. It is not a guarantee. It is another question. Can you stay with yourself even when you do not know what is coming? Because that is real trust, not the one that expects everything to go well, but the one that stays even when everything seems to be falling apart. Not the one that depends on results, but the one that is born from the deepest bond you can build, the bond with yourself. And that bond does not happen overnight. It is cultivated. It is cultivated when you choose not to flee from what you feel, when you choose not to judge your process, when you choose to breathe even when your internal world trembles, when you choose to put your hand on your chest and say, I am here, I will not leave. Trust is not knowing that you will not fall. It is knowing that if you fall, you will not be left alone. And that changes everything because you begin to move from another place, not from the urgency of avoiding pain, but from the stillness of knowing that you can hold it, not from the desire to control, but from the peace of knowing that you are building a refuge within yourself. And little by little your body feels it. You breathe deeper. You talk to yourself more gently. You make decisions you avoided before, and without realizing it, you trust. Not because the world changed, but because you are different, because you no longer leave yourself behind. And that trust does not scream, it does not demand, it does not run. It is like a whisper that accompanies you, that tells you in the midst of chaos, keep going. You are doing the best you can. You are returning to yourself, and that is enough. To trust is not to have the map. It is to walk with an open heart. So, you have reached the end of this journey, but it is truly the beginning of your transformation. The greatest illusion is that healing has a final destination, a place free of shadows, fear, or emptiness. The profound secret you have unlocked today, rooted in the timeless wisdom of Carl Jung, is that true power isn't in a cure, it's in a commitment. Healing is not a goal. It is the way you now choose to live. It is the sacred, daily, invisible promise you make to no longer abandon yourself when pain arrives. From this moment on, you are no longer the same person. You've been given the key. The constant search is over. Because you now understand the goal was never to be strong, but to be honest. Not to be perfect, but to be present. This is the spiritual alchemy that changes everything. While the world chases fleeting fixes, you now hold the power of presence. Life will still bring chaos, fear will still visit, but you will meet it from a place of unshakable inner ground. This is the foundation. But integrating this truth into your relationships, your purpose, and your daily life is the next powerful chapter.
The journey does not end here. Before you go, I want you to anchor this feeling. In the comments below, declare in one single powerful word what this journey has awakened in you. Was it presence, courage, truth, freedom? Let your word be the first conscious step on your new path. And as you share your word, take a moment to hit the like button, as it signals to others that a powerful shift is happening right here. It's a fact that a huge number of people who find life-changing value in these
videos are not yet subscribed. If this message has touched your soul, then you belong in this community. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because our journey into the deeper layers of the soul is only just beginning. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for not letting go. Thank you for finally becoming the home your soul has always been searching for. The cure was never outside. It has always been within you, and today, you have finally allowed it to flourish.